Today's shir will cover some quite challenging sugyas in Masechta Yuma, in the introduction that we have to the avodas of the Kohen Gadol, and it really touches on this distinction that we spoke about yesterday between avodos that are unique to Yom Kippurim, as opposed to the avodos that apply the whole year round. And this has a specific impact also on the begadim, because as we said before, the avodah, the Kohen Gadol, when he goes b'fnai v'nifnimi, requires big day lava. So let's just review what we said at the end of yesterday's discussion, that there's a levisha of big day lavan in the morning, and then there's another levisha bein harbayim, so that when the Kohen Gadol is ready for his avodah at the crack of dawn, he wears big day lavan before he begins the avodah sayom. Then there's another levisha of big day lavan, and that's bein harbayim, when he's about to remove the kaf and machta of the ketoris from the Kodesh Kodshim. And we mentioned that the begadim that he wears in the morning for his avodah sayom, those big day lavan are on a higher level, an extra dimension of kedusha vis-a-vis the begadim that he wears just to clean up the Kodesh Kodshim by taking out the leftover ashes from the, with the kaf and macht. Now, in the light of that introduction, what do we do with the begadim of the Kohen Gadol at the end of Yom Kippur? After all, those begadim are the four begadim they love on which a Kohen Hedjot wears the whole year round. Can we bequeath them to a Kohen Hedjot? And here we have a halach of geniza. And that means that both the big day lavan that he wore in the morning at the Tchilas Avodas Hayom and the big day lavan that he put on bein harbayim for the avodah, the ktores, the ktores, both of these sets of begadim, big day lavan, require gniza. However, the Gemara on Daf Yud Beis in Masechta Yoma quotes a machlokas tanoim with regard to a Kohen Hedjot. And according to one Tana, when we say that the big day lavan of the Kohen Gadol of Yom Kippurim are not reused, that's what the word gniza means, that only applies for the Kohen Gadol himself. This was designated for the Kohen Gadol for this particular Yom Kippur and not for next Yom Kippur. However, with regard to a Kohen Hedjot who needs big day lavan the whole year round, he's allowed to use the begadim of the Kohen Gadol. There's no need to get rid of them. They have kedusha, they have sanctity, and now they're earmarked for a Kohen Hedjot the whole year round. And when the Torah says that they shouldn't be recycled, these big day lavan, it's referring only to the Kohen Gadol himself. He has a mitzvah on an annual basis to wear new begadim, not the begadim that he wore the year before. The second shita in the Tanoim holds that there's a pasuk that teaches me that there's an absolute requirement of gniza. Gniza meaning we have to bury these begadim at the end of Yom Kippur. No one's allowed to use them. And where is the pasuk that indicates that no one's allowed to use the begadim? It says in Parshas Achremos, "Uba Aaron el Ol Moed Upashat es big day abad asher lavash b'vol hakodesh v'nicham sham." What do we derive from the nicham sham? It should place them there, Shegonzam bimkom lefisha teurim gniza v'yasur bana. B'nicham sham means they have to be buried there in a specific place, and the Gemara goes through a discussion about where the geniza should take place. But the bottom line for our purposes is that it's also by no, you can't get any benefit from the big day Lavan of the Kohen Gadol at the end of Yom Kippur, and the Rambam paskins like that second man the Omar also by no, requiring geniza, and no one, not even a Kohen Hedger, who has never worn these begadim, and these are the exact begadim, exactly what he needs for his avoda. He cannot benefit from the begadim of the Kohen Gadol, the big day love, and that's called geniza. So that paragraph is an addendum to yesterday's discussion about big day Lavan and big day Zav and Kategar, the whole thing that we discussed yesterday. But now we begin our subject for today. And by way of introduction, we're talking about the word Seder. The Rambam uses the word Seder in two places. Once in Hilchos Pesach, Chametz Matzah, with regard to the night of the Seder, and number two, in Hilchos Avodas Yom Kippur. There too, there's a Seder. In both cases, the halacha requires a specific sequence. And for example, in the case of the night of the Seder on the 15th of Nisan, if you were to eat the matzah, let's say you would eat the maror before the matzah, or for example, you would eat the matzah before the Haggadah, you would not fulfill your mitzvah because the Torah says, Lechem oni sha'onim olav dvarim harbi. We have to first recite the Haggadah and then eat the matzah. Al matzah sumerom yachlu means we have to eat the matzah first and then the maror, and so forth and so on. There are many, many different dinim that reflect the word Seder. That's what we call the night of the Seder. And Seder is a critical element. So too in Avodas Yom Kippurim, Seder is a critical element. So I'll just give you, again, forward a preview of coming attractions. One example of Seder would be Matnas HaPar and Hazos Hadam Haseir. You remember that yesterday we discussed two karbanos of the Kohen, one of the Kohen Gadol and one of the Am, that are very unique in the whole, again, without going through all the details, and that was Paro Shel Kohen Gadol and Soyer La'am. And in the sequence of it, we need that first there should be the dam of the Soyer, which is sprinkled in the Kodesh Kodshim, and only afterwards are we ready for the Nesinas Matnos HaPar, which is done on the Mizbeach HaPnimi in the Heichal. So just, again, we don't have to remember all the details right now, we'll get to them, but just remember that the Soyer comes before the Par. And if he switched around the order and he did the Matan Domim of the Har before the Azah in the Kodesh Kodashim of the Damas Soyer, then what? I mean, that's going to be our discussion for today, but it's a serious violation because Seder is critical in the Avodah of Yom Kippur. Now, when we say Seder is critical, the Talmudic proper terminology for this is li'ikuva. It's ma'akeh. That's what we mean by critical. Now, when is Seder li'ikuva? Is it an absolute rule? Is Seder always li'ikuva in the Avodas HaKorbanos? The answer is no. We need a word in the Torah, which has 4 letters, chukah. Whenever the Torah adds the word chukah, which literally translates as statute, chukah means Seder li'ikuva. And with regard to the avodos of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim, there are two different parashiyos in the Torah. And the word chukah only appears in one of those two parashiyos. So when the Torah addresses the unique avodos of Yom Kippurim, the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, in Parshas Achrimos, there the Torah employs the word chukah to tell you that those unique avodos, like we mentioned before, the par shel Kohen Gadol, or the soyer la'am, those karbanos, which are formulated in Parshas Achrimos, come under the klal, the requirement of chukah, because the Torah says, "Vayikra tezayin v'yisa zos lachem lechukas olam lechaper al bnei Yisrael mikol chatosim achas b'shana." So the Torah in Achrimos employs the word chukas olam, and chukah tells me that Seder is li'ikuva. It's not just a mitzvah. This is the right ideal way of doing it in this order, but that the order is critical. And A has to come before B. If you did B before A, then B wasn't ready. You weren't ready for B. You jumped the gun. You needed A before B. And the Torah says chukah. And that means that Seder is li'ikuva. Whenever the Torah uses the word chukah, is kosvanei Torah kidei lelamed she haseder ma'akev afilu b'di'evet, for whatever din that's called chukah. Avodas Yom Kippurim in Parshas Achrimos, the Torah uses the word chukah, and therefore seder avodah ma'akev afilu b'di'evet. And this we'll learn in a Mishnah in Yoma on Daf Samach. Now, the Kohen Gadol wears two sets of begadim on Yom Kippur. For those avodos that apply the whole year round and overlap on Yom Kippur, he wears Bigdei Zav. And the Torah, when it addresses Bigdei Zav, does not add the word chukah. But there are avodos where the Kohen Gadol has to wear Bigdei Lavan. Those are the avodos that are unique to Yom Kippurim, that are recorded in the Torah Parshas Achrimos, where it says chukah. Their Seder is li'ikuva. Therefore, be'avodos beBigdei Zav v'lo nemer ben chukah. So even though he's implementing these avodos on Yom Kippurim, but they are not in the Torah on the chukah, and therefore Seder is not li'ikuva. But when we get to the avodos hanasos b'bigdei lavan, and those avodos are mentioned in Parshas Achrimos with the word chukah, there the Seder is li'ikuva. So elu shenasos those avodos hanasos b'bigdei zav shelo nemar ba'inyanam chukah is lefichach im hiktim ma'aseh lechavero b'dvarim hanasim b'bigdei zav harei hakarban Kodshim. So when we say that the word Seder reflects on the unique nature of avodas Yom Kippurim, and the Seder is li'ikuva, we're talking about the avodos that are formulated by the Torah in Parshas Achrimos that require Bigdei Lavan. But those avodos which the Kohen Gadol will implement while he's wearing Bigdei Zav, if he's makdim as hamauchar, he changes the order, is the karban is Kodshim. Why? Because Bigdei Zav is not indicative of an avoda that is formulated by the Torah in Parshas Chukas. I'm sorry, in Parshas Achrimos. And if it's not in Achrimos, then it doesn't have chukah, and therefore the Seder is lemitzvah but not li'ikuv. Okay, now we're ready to discuss Bigdei Lavan, where we said that Seder is li'ikuva. All right. Now here's where we have to take a deep breath because it gets a bit complicated. So we'll try to do the best we can. With regard to Bigdei Lavan, if you had a flow chart, so you've got Big Day Zav on the top here on the right and Big Day Love on the left. Now, in Big Day Love on, you have two subcategories. You have Big Day Love on for what's called Avodas Chutz, and you have Big Day Love on, which are worn for Avodas Pnim. So let me present the view of one school of thought. And I don't want to brainwash you because we're going to have a dissenting view, but let's go step by step. According to one school of thought in the Tanoim, amongst the Tanoim, in the Sugya on Daf Samach, the halacha of Seder Likuva in Big Day Lavan, in Avodos Hanasos Big Day Lavan, only apply to Avodos Shenasos Bifnim, but not to Avodos Hanasos Bachutz. And according to one school of thought in the Tanoim, Gam al Avodos Hanasos Bachutz, Nemar Bahen Chuka, the word Chuka, which appears in Parshas Achribos, reflects on any avodos that are performed with Big Day Lovin, even if they're performed bachutz. Again, we're going to get to the details later, but let's just get the concepts. And according to the other sheet in the Tanoim, lo nemar chuka ela bavodos hanasos bifnim. So wearing Big Day Lovin, according to that sheet, is not ipso facto an automatic requirement of Seder Ma'akev of Chukah, because Chukah only points, is only related to the Avodos, the Big Day Lavan, Shanasos Bifnim. Okay, fine. So what's the status of Avodos, Hanasos, Big Day Lavan, Bachutz? Machlokes Tanoi. Now we get to defining chutz. What does chutz mean? Does chutz mean chutz lekodesh hakadoshim, or does chutz mean chutz lehechal in the Azorah? So according to one Tana who says that the halacha of likuva does not apply, even though he requires Big Day Lavan, if the avod is nasis b'chutz, what chutz is chutz? Is it chutz lekodesh kadoshim? So, for example, any avoda that's done in the heichal, the Big Day Lavan, is not included under chukah, because chukah only applies to an avoda hanases bifnim, meaning bekodesh kadoshim, ufnai v'lifnim. Or do we say no? That any avoda that's done in the heichal, even outside the Kodesh Kadosh, but it's not performed in the Azara, then we say chukah and it's likuva. But if it's performed in the Azara, that's already called an avodas chutz. And in such a case, we don't have chukah and we don't apply the principle of Seder likuv. Nechlaku Rishonim, if you happen to have the text in front of you, it's 3 lines before the end of the page. Yeshes over Chepnim, Hainu, Lifnai v'Lifnim, meaning Kodesh Kadosh. Chutz is Avoda Nasis Behechal. How much more so if it's Nasis Be'azara? But even if it's not in the Chutz, but it's Chutz le Pnim, meaning it's in the Hechal, but not in the Kodesh Kadoshim, it's called chutz, and according to one sheet in the Tanoim, there's no din of chukah, and Seder is not likuv. The Yeshes over. Now we get to the second opinion. Shegam avoda nasis behechal nikreis nechsheves lavodas pnim. Pnim means in conscious to the Azorah. V'raka avodos hanasos. Here we turn to page 4. Hanasos ba'azora heim avodas chutz. Okay. So again, we're going according to the Mandiyoma, who says that in avodas chutz, even though he requires big day lavan, Seder is not likuva. The question is what's called chutz. Is it chutz lekodesh kadoshim or chutz lehechal in the Azor? Now keep in mind, one of the prime examples of Shalokis Seder, where he messed up on the sequence, is the case of Par Chata Shel Kohen Gadol. The Par Chata Shel Kohen Gadol is an avoda in the Heichal. It's not in the Kodesh Kadoshim. That's the one that we're focusing our attention on. And whether or not Seder Likuva, if he, let's say, did this avoda with the Par Chatas in the Heichal before he did the avoda of the Seir in the Kodesh Kadoshim, that's going to be the subject of this machlokas. Because do we apply Seder Ma'akiv and Chukah to a case of an avoda that's performed in the Heichal, but outside the Kodesh Kadoshim? Like the case of the Matanas of the Par of Kohen Gadol, which is done in the Heichal and not in the Kodesh Kadosh. Okay. Let me just add one point as an introduction, even though we're again in the middle of this sugya of Keseder, but when we say Seder is Likuva, let's say in Avodas Pnim, whatever that means, whether it's Pnim, Lifnai v'Lifnim, or it's Lifnim of the Azor meaning in the Heichal, we have to ask, what does that mean, Seder Likuva? If he did B before A, clearly B is invalid when Seder is Likuva and Avodas Pnim. But what's the status of B? Does the fact that he brought A after B, I'm sorry, what's the status of A? I meant to say. So as far as B is concerned, if Seder is Likuva, we're not ready for B, he hasn't brought A yet, then B is invalid. He has to replace it. But what's the status of A? Correct? So A he brought after B. He meant he should have done it A before B, but he brought A after B. Switch to Seder, he brought B first. B is a serious problem because you need A before B. Okay, so let's invalidate B. If we invalidate B, can we consider A to now be the first carbon, even though in fact he brought B before A? Was there a Shinui Seder Likuva as far as A is concerned? Because he brought B before A. Or shall we say that B is nothing? It's invalid. And therefore, in effect, he brought A before B because there was no B, even though physically, in reality, there was B. All right, that's just an introduction to our discussion for tomorrow. So let's just make a note of where we got up to here. Shalo ya'acher v'shalo ya'ach.